So, good morning. Today, we're going to be talking all about gut health, and I'm going to be joined. Well, I'm not going to be because I can see her; she's right here. Joined by someone who, what she knows everything. I was going to say what she doesn't know isn't worth knowing, but pretty much you know everything, don't you, Megan? So, Dr. Megan Rossi is here, and you are the gut health guru. Um, let's dive straight in and talk about what changes would you recommend, if any, do we need to make any, that women who are, say, approaching perimenopause, 40s plus or whatever, need to make to their diet when it comes to looking after their general well-being? Do we need to make any changes, and if so, what are they?
Yeah, I think that's a great question because actually, I love that the science is empowering females to take more control over this stage of life where it can be really daunting. I obviously haven't gone through it yet, but I hear it from my patients and clients all the time how all of these things starting to pop up and they no longer feel like themselves. So the scientific evidence has really come to the forefront. And I won't get too deep into the science, but I think sometimes before I talk about just what we can do, it's helpful to know why, because I think this why really does fuel the motivation and the commitment. And I think historically everyone knew that diet had a role in our health and well-being, mental health and stuff like that. But it's more recently where we discovered the fact that we have these trillions of bacteria in our gut, and they're actually doing so much for us, in particular, regulating our hormones. So there are these particular groups of bacteria in our gut called the estrabolome, and these bacteria actually help regulate estrogen. So the scientific studies have shown that if we start to really nourish our gut microbiome, particularly in our 40s leading up to menopause, then actually we can do things like not only delay the natural menopause by around 4 or so years, but when we hit going through the perimenopause, then the symptoms are also, we can help reduce them. Things like the bloating, the hot flushes, and stuff like that. So it is actually a really, exciting and empowering time for females to take that bit of control back and absolutely understand if you've got kids or you've got a business and you're working, all of those sorts of things. We don't want to have to quit our jobs to have good gut health, and that's certainly not the case. There's a lot of really simple things. So I guess two of the really I guess prominent areas that the science has highlighted is firstly having more plants. So we'll talk about plants, and I know a lot of people can kind of switch off and go, well, I don't really like the taste of plants, or I don't want to just eat only plants. Then the other thing is actually oily fish. So Andrea, how often do you have your oily fish, like salmon, trout, sardines, herring, those ones? How often? I'm going to quiz you to see how good you're doing on the oily fish front.
Well, that's quite hard to say, is it? The oily fish front. I'm quite proud of myself, actually, and it was a conscious decision, because this is not something that people would wake up and decide to do. And I think it's because, and I'll be interested to get your take on this, we have been marketed to that. And we're so used to it, we don't even question it, that cereal is the way to start your day, that you have a bowl of cereal or what have you. And it was fairly recently, I'd say it was this year, when I was having to look to overhaul my health. So I've been poorly due to long COVID, actually, not because of menopause. So I then had to look to overhaul my diet. So I introduced, I'm going to start my day with protein. And for me, that meant, and I feel sorry for everyone else in the house, Megan, it is a tin of sardines in tomato sauce, the old fashioned kind that you just pull back, plop that into a
Perfect. Yeah.
saucepan, and 2 eggs, mix it all together. And I literally have that. Sometimes I have a bit of sourdough toast with it, but more often than not, I don't. And that's how I start my day. So it's eggs and sardines. It's not palatable for everyone else, but I've got used to it now.
Yeah, amazing. So you're doing brilliantly on the oily fish, and it is hard to say front. So yes, that is ticking the omega-3s, and we know they can be anti-inflammatory. And the study I referred to about delaying the natural menopause, they showed that 90 grams of oily fish most days was one of the predictors of delaying it. So thumbs up there. I also love that you're getting the ones in tomato, because we know that tomato contains something called lycopenes, and actually that can help protect our skin from UV damage, particularly now it's summer. So nothing to do with the menopause, so to speak, but the lycopenes in tomato, particularly when it's with something that contains fat, like the oily fish or extra virgin olive oil, is a winning combo. So you're ticking on two fronts there. But what I would like to add in is that second element around the plants. And we know in particular legumes is incredibly beneficial for people going, through this stage of life. So things like your chickpeas, your butter beans, your black beans, kidney beans, those ones. And the reason for that is that they've got this specific type of fiber in it, which actually feeds our beneficial and anti-inflammatory gut bacteria that help recycle that estrogen in our body. So if you could sneak in, even if it's just a tablespoon of chickpeas, or if you're having a stir fry for dinner, add a can of the mixed beans, or even your bolognaise sauce, sneak them in. Even if the family don't like them, they typically don't really notice if you blend them into sauces as well. So it's a really accessible add, and you don't need to go and do all the soaking and the painful stuff like that. A tin of canned legumes, just triple rinse it to limit some of the bloating that can occur with them, is your best bet.
Now, I have to admit, I took this hack from you, because I've got your book, and leafing through it, and what one of the brilliant things about the advice that you give in terms of keeping a healthy gut is this sneaky addition of things that are good for you, and this is kind of your superpower. And I haven't told the family that I do this, and they haven't noticed, so it's fine. So when I'm making things like
Hopefully
spaghetti,
they're not watching it.
yeah, they're not watching. They just think mum does some boring Facebook thing, so I'm totally fine. Is a tin of lentils, and again, like you say, rinse through thoroughly, and I stick it in, whether it's, like say, bolognese or chili or something that it's already got a lot of flavor to it, but I feel like I'm adding another layer that they don't even notice. And sometimes I'll even get some of the little frozen balls of spinach, and I'm kind of like that, throwing it in and mixing it up so that they don't notice it's got bits of green in. But yeah, it's sort of sneaky in the same way that if I'm trying to coach them or have a conversation with them, it's sideways rather than head on. I sort of do the same with my cooking. But we can all do that, can't we? Just add it in sideways. Don't just think, oh, I'm now doomed to a life of, salmon salad and that's it.
Absolutely. And there are so many things, particularly as we go into summer, like smoothies. Like what I often do is just buy the bags of frozen cauliflower. And then the cauliflower goes perfectly in any sort of smoothie you're having. So fruit smoothie, chocolate smoothie. And what that does, again, adds these specific types of fiber that feed your gut bacteria. And you can't even taste it because it kind of blends and adds that little bit of extra creaminess. So those small wins really is how we can maximize, I guess, the science around gut health without having to have a boring tasting diet and spend all this extra money and stuff like that. The other thing I think is quite important to add is around protein. And you've hit it in terms of you starting your day with a decent amount of protein. And as we get older, actually, the science has shown that we do need a little bit of extra protein. Now, it doesn't need to necessarily come from animal sources. So I'm not talking about you have to go and have all this steak or even eggs if you don't want to. We know that things like our legume family, again, the chickpeas, soybeans, all that sort of stuff, nuts and seeds, the oily fish, fermented dairy like yogurt, quality cheese, all of them have good quality protein in it. And as our muscles start to waste that little bit more as we get older, we actually do need to have that little bit of extra protein in our diet. But the trick with the protein is not to just have it all at once. So in order to help our body maximize the benefit and the absorption for our muscle maintenance, and that can also help with weight management, another issue that a lot of people kind of describe going through at the menopause, is small regular amounts of protein. So don't just have it at your breakfast, have a small amount then, snack on, can of tuna and some veggie sticks, or, a boiled egg, or, some chickpeas, then a little bit in your lunch, then a little bit in your dinner. So spread it across the day, and that helps your body's, maximally absorb that protein and therefore also assimilate and kind of maintain the muscle mass that we've got. So that's probably another tip that I'd recommend people start to think about the protein, because I think it is probably underspoken about. We're always talking about fiber, which I'm always talking about fiber because it's so important, and we're certainly not getting enough, which we get from all our plants. But actually, in this particular stage of life, protein's another important nutrient that we need to make sure we're getting enough of. I
When
did
you,
mention about the
if I can
plants,
just ask you
and I
something
think,
there. You've mentioned introducing
yeah,
more plants into our diet. Now, obviously, the government recommendation used to be 5 portions of fruit and veg a day. Then now we're talking 10. Um, as a gut health practitioner, there's I don't think the problem is that there's not enough information. I think the problem is that there's too much information and it's quite conflicting. Is there sort of a rule of thumb when it comes to, right, okay, how much protein shall I try and eat? How much fruit and veg shall I try and eat? And what does that look like, say, across a breakfast, a lunch, a dinner? How what would that look like?
yeah, that's a really good point, and it can be a bit confusing when it feels like the goalposts keep moving, and
Mm.
very few people are reaching the 5 fruit and veg a day anyway. And here they're now saying 10. It's like, well, this is a bit overwhelming, right? And then in terms of the protein, it does actually depend on your body weight. So historically, they were saying about 0.8 grams of protein per kilogram of body weight. But now we're thinking as we get older, it's probably more around the 1.2 grams. So I would say something, like a chicken breast like this would deliver about 20 grams or 30 grams of protein. A little pot of yogurt, about 10 grams of protein. A handful of seeds and nuts, about 6 grams of protein. So it does add up in terms of the protein. But I guess the fiber and the plant side of things is worth talking about, because those public health guidelines, I think, are a little bit outdated. They've kind of been based on very old school science and haven't kind of been renewed based on this whole area of our gut microbiome, because we know these bacteria are so important for regulating our hormones, regulating our mental health, regulating our appetite and all these other factors. But I guess their needs haven't really been thought about in these public health guidelines. So there's actually 6 different plant-based food groups, and each of the different categories of bacteria prefer different types. So if we're just getting in all our veggie fiber or all our fruit fiber, we're actually going to be missing out on the fiber, so that the food for the bacteria, the fertilizer for the bacteria from those other categories, and therefore actually we're not going to have optimal gut health. So one of my top tips, and I hope people can take away from today, is thinking about, have they had something from the Super 6 plant food groups? Can't speak today. I'm going to blame it on our baby brain. So have they had something from the Super 6 plant-based food groups today? And Andrew, I'm going to put you on the spot again. I know you're very up there with your nutrition, but can you have a think about what these Super 6 might be in terms of the different plant-based food groups?
Or just off the top of my head, so this is fruit and veg that we're talking. Are they just
No,
plants?
all plants,
All
all
plants.
categories of plants.
So off the top of my head, I'm thinking then, would it be the difference between, say, a root vegetable, like a fruit, a berry, a plant that's grown on the tree, just all the different types? Is that what you mean?
That is a good categorization, but that would be within the fruit category. So, and this just shows that, there is so much information out there. I think some of the key principles don't actually penetrate that they should be. So the 6 are the fruit group, as you've highlighted, the vegetable group, the legume group, so things like your chickpeas, your butter beans, the whole grain group, the nuts and seeds, and the herbs and spices.
Right. Right.
So each of them actually provides our gut bacteria in our body with different types of nutrients. And this is where I think we're probably going wrong in terms of people who are struggling with, a whole lot of bloating, or, think that they're having all their fruit and veg and therefore they should have optimal gut health, but they're still feeling a bit fatigued and stuff like that. I think this missing principle of diversity, plant diversity, because each different plant contains different, fibers and all these other things called phytochemicals, which feed the gut bacteria. So next time you sit down to a meal, think about, okay, what categories from these super six am I having? And
Yeah.
for dinner, do I need to sprinkle on, some seeds? Or should I add just a shake of herbs just to tick off
Yeah.
that box? And actually, if you follow this principle of adding in the super six most days, you'll hopefully notice by around 8 weeks that actually you do feel a little bit more energy, and maybe your clothes are feeling really good on your body. And if you are going through perimenopause, then maybe the hot flushes have reduced.
Do you know what's so interesting about that? Because at first you kind of panic and think, oh no, that's a lot. Oh, that's something else to think about. But as you were talking there, I was thinking when we cook, we do add, say if something is like a tomato, we saw, so, we're talking about spaghetti bolognese. Because obviously if you're feeding your kids, it's that balance of trying to find, and you know this, you've got a little one and one on the way, and you're trying to cook for the whole family. So just thinking about it off the top of my head, you don't just use one ingredient. So obviously you have tomatoes in there, so that that's one. Add the tin of lentils, and if it's chili, then you got your kidney beans as well. And then you do always add herbs and spices to that to make it flavorsome. But I've never considered that actually is part of something that's good for me. I always just think of it as something that's adding flavor. So, which is great, and that means then that you're automatically getting a handful of them without even thinking about it. I suppose as well, if you put a bit of a few slices of avocado on the side and this sort of thing, or the next day you're having it with a jacket potato rather than with rice. One of the things I wanted to ask you as well is there a difference between the potency of these, the six things that you mentioned, if they're cooked or if they're on salads? Does it not make much of a difference, or is it's fine if you just balance between the two?
Yeah, really good one. And a lot of people do ask, so should I be having veggies raw or should I be cooking them? What's the best option? And the truth is, again, it comes back to this diversity concept. I think, in cultures, we want more diversity. In our diet, we want more diversity. In our cooking methods, we want more diversity, because diversity seems to be the key. Now, the reason I say that is, take broccoli, for example. So there's a certain type of like anti-inflammatory chemical in broccoli, which is best when we have it in its raw state. So if you chop up some broccoli and sprinkle it in your salad, you're going to maximally absorb that, right? But actually, there's other types of plant chemicals that you better absorb when the broccoli's cooked,
Right.
specifically if you put a little bit extra virgin olive oil in it or something like that. So the truth is, to get all of the breadth of nutrients, you actually want to combine it and have different cooking methods, essentially. The only one where we know probably leaches a lot of beneficial nutrients is if you're like over boiling things. But what I would say, as long as you're drinking a lot of the soup or making it into a soup, yes, some of the nutrients might be denatured by the fact that it's heating for a long amount of time, but you're still going to get plenty there. So, mixing up between stir fry, things like steaming, and even microwaving, because it's actually quite quick to cook things, so less temperature involved to denature some of the nutrients. So, yeah, that was a bit of a ramble, but essentially all the methods, mixing them up is going to be king there. And like you were saying, Andrea, it certainly isn't about spending extra money or extra time. It's thinking diversity at the supermarket. So, instead of just getting your one type of berry, get the frozen berries with the 3 different kinds in it. Instead of maybe just getting your lentils, get the 3 bean mix. It's got more variety. Because each category, even within the super six, so within the veggie groups, within the, the fruit groups, contain the different varieties. So there's 2 numbers to think about. One is the 6 categories of plants across the day. So those plant-based food groups. And then the second number to think about is 30 different plants across your whole week. And, if you're only very new to this concept, stick with the super six and just thinking about that diversity of the big categories. But if you feel like you nailed that, the next step is thinking, okay, I want to get in at least 30 different types of plants across the week. And if you've got young kids, it makes a really fun activity. You start to count the plant points that you're eating. Go, oh yeah, I haven't had kiwi this week, so maybe I have kiwi fruit instead of my normal apple. Or, I haven't had any mint this week. Actually, I might put it in my cocktail. Then I get a point there. So thinking about that can be another sort of fun way to engage the whole family in getting more of this diversity in.
Two things that struck me there that I thought, oh, I want to ask you about. What the first thing is, the difference between fresh fruit and vegetables and frozen fruit and vegetables, because I've started investing more in frozen recently. Lots of reasons, space in the fridge being one, two, getting really fed up of buying them, the family don't eat them, then they go off and it feels like such a waste. And what
Yeah.
I'm finding is actually having these bags of frozen, even things like mushrooms and onions and things that I would normally just have, fresh. I'm finding I'm using them more because I only need a little bit at a time. Do they still have the same amount of goodness, or do they have even more goodness if they've been frozen?
Yeah, so I mean, it will depend on the variety, but generally they're equally as good because, if not better, in some scenarios where they snap freeze them. Because if you think about a lot of where our fruit and veg get imported from Portugal and Spain, it has to travel so far, and the time, every extra day it's losing nutrients. Whereas if they snap freeze them, at the source of where they were grown, actually that can retain some of these extra nutrients. So I am a huge fan of going frozen, both for the convenience, the cost of less waste and things like that. Of course, what I always like to caveat that it's not just frozen, because I think sometimes people go, okay, that's it, I'm just doing frozen. And we do know that some nutrients are better in the fresh state. So, the ones that you're definitely going to eat, keep buying them fresh. And obviously things like tomatoes and avocados don't do that well frozen anyway. But load the fridge with all the different sort of like stir fry mix of frozen veg. That's certainly what's in my freezer.
And the second thing is microwaving, because we have swung so wildly as a society when it comes to our attitude towards microwave food. Where are we now with it?
Yeah, I know. And I think there are so many myths out there that it's causing, like, doing all this radiation and stuff like that. But they've actually done some really decent studies where they compare, steaming or boiling veg versus putting it in the microwave. And they've shown, but because of the shorter duration of time, as well as the lower temperature, actually it does retain a lot of nutrients. And also, let's not like lose sight of the fact that it can speed up cooking. So whenever I'm going to have some roasted veg, like sweet potato or pumpkin, what I do is put it in the microwave to cut down the baking time by about 20 minutes, and it's only in the microwave for about 4 minutes. So it's a really kind of quick hack. So yes, gone are the days of the demonizing the microwave. Obviously, it depends what you put in the microwave. So if you're just living off microwave dinners, and I think that may be another reason why people have bad associations, is that the high fat, high salt processed microwave dinners. But yeah, they're actually, the science is saying that it's completely fine, if not helpful in some cases, to use.
Megan, as ever, you have literally filled 24 minutes with incredible amounts of information. If people want to reach out to you and find out a bit more about not just your cookery, but advice and this sort of thing, where can people find you?
Yeah, absolutely. So head over to the Gut Health Doctor. There's loads of free information, whether it's recipes or blogs. So you can get that stuff there. And then obviously there's the Gut Health Doctor Instagram. And if people do want more clinical advice, then I've got a team of brilliant gut specialist dietitians at the Gut Health Clinic.
Brilliant. Thank you so much, and good luck with Bump.
Yeah, it's a pleasure. Chat to you soon, Andrea.
All right. Thank you. Brilliant.